ranked among the finest batsmen of his generation. Some say he was one of the best of all time. Yet he played just 4 test matches. Technically flawless, extravagantly gifted, Barry Anderson Richards is one of ESPN's legends of cricket. The 1969-70 Test series between South Africa and Australia was billed as the World Championship. Making his debut in that series was the gifted 24-year-old Barry Richards.
Without a shadow of doubt, the best 2 batsmen that I played with or against, B.A. Richards and Sir Garfield Sobers, without a doubt.
I think if I had to choose someone to bat for my life, I'd choose Barry. I think he's almost the perfect batsman.
Barry was an absolutely superb player. You know, great is for greats, and he was definitely one of those.
Barry was a magnificent player, technically very good, and also he was, apart from the fact that he was technically good, he scored very quickly, which is quite an unusual combination in an opening batsman.
Barry, I think, would be up there with Greg Chappell, easily. I've seen Barry latter years, you know, even batting after we finished, he was just a freak. So I said Greg Chappell's the best batsman I played against in my time because I didn't get a good look at Barry, but I'd swear he'd be there with him.
He was a real technician. He was very correct in what he did. He had an excellent technique. There was no question about it. He was technically very, very sound and scored a lot of runs.
Technically, he's probably as good as anybody that's played. And obviously huge talent. And he got run, he liked getting run.
There will be those who will tell you that he's as good as they've seen. There's some people and some good judges who will say that Barry Richards is right up there with Graham Pollock and Gary Sobers, and I don't disagree. I played against all 3 of them, and I think there's not much in it.
He's so much time in which to play the ball. He had all the time in the world. I've seen me umpiring there, and I've seen the ball leave the bowler's hand and go through the air, and it's still there. And I've thought, when is he going to move? When is Barry going to move? But by God, when he moved, it picked the line and length up so quickly, whether it's on the back foot or the front foot. A tremendous player.
I think it's the style more than the achievements with Barry Richards and his ability to score runs on difficult wickets in difficult circumstances, which put him way ahead of everybody around him.
Last man out is Conway, and Bucker appropriately ends the series by taking the final catch to send the Aussies crashing to a 323-run defeat. South Africa win the series 4-0, a clean sweep for the first time. Well done, Springboks.
The 1969-70 home series against Australia would be South Africa's last for 21 years. The Test career of Barry Richards was cut short after 4 glorious matches. International condemnation of South Africa's apartheid policy led the Springboks to be shunned. Richards spent the best years of his cricket life as a mercenary in domestic first-class competitions in England and Australia, and in Kerry Packer's World Series cricket.
I really enjoyed World Series cricket because it was such a challenge for us as South Africans never having played, and I think it was important to protect our image. You know, we'd also built up quite an aura as a very good side of the 70s.
I think all those South Africans that played in it had a fantastic time of it. It was the highest level, I think anyone, highest level I played. And I think if you speak to all the guys that played in World Series cricket, it was probably the highest level that they ever played, and the highest level, I think, of any cricket ever played. It really was fiercely competed. And I think the reason for that was that we were totally ostracised from the rest of the world.
Barry Richards was always going to be an outstanding batsman.
The seeds were sown certainly very early on, and I mean, cricket was very much part and parcel of the landscape, and every afternoon it was either tip and run or some sort of game of cricket. And luckily I had 3 older boys who used to live it, so it was, once you got in, you had to stay in, otherwise you didn't get a knock for it a couple of weeks. So, you know, I think the seeds were sown very early.
He was just a magnificent player from the time I played against him when he played for Clifton and I played for Highbury at junior school level. His timing was always fantastic.
Richards' first overseas tour was as a schoolboy in England in 1963.
I think, you know, it gave us the first sense in my sort of humble career that we were as good as anybody else, because we were playing the premier schools in England and we were whooping them. I mean, I knew we had a really good side. I mean, we were the pick of all of the South African schools, and they were just a school. So you had to take that into account. But I think the ease with which we won all our games, and not only that, when we played against second 11s, now these were pros, and I think we acquitted ourselves really well against the second 11s, where guys were aspiring to play first-class cricket and weren't that far away, and here we were, a bunch of schoolboys giving them a good run for our money. So I think that instilled a lot of confidence early on that, you know, we weren't out of our depth at all.
He played one match for Gloucestershire in 1965. Then he returned a year later with Mike Proctor and Lee Irvine, finding work as a kit boy in the West Indian dressing room.
You read about these fellas, Sobers and Kanai and Butcher and Nurse, and suddenly there they were. And I mean, it was just a tremendous experience to be able to view them from the balcony, which was obviously the best view in the house, and to be part of it and to get the atmosphere of a dressing room. And I mean, Sobey was at the time was the premier probably of all time. One of the greatest. So just being in his company was sort of inspiring. I think it inspired me to say, well, hey, this is where I want to be, in a test match dressing room, and I'm going to put my head down and try and do it.
After enjoying success in English county cricket and in the Currie Cup in South Africa, the rapidly maturing Richards was selected to play in the home test series against Australia in 1970.
I think Barry probably played his cricket, most of his cricket, with a point to prove. I think he felt, and he should have played in the previous series, 66-7, but the selectors didn't pick him. So I think it might have been a good thing for Barry. It might have been part of the motivation that drove him. I think Barry played a lot of his cricket with a point to prove.
The team in 1970 was an unbelievable team, where it was so good that at that time Barry was at his peak. Barry, to me, one of the greatest players this world's ever seen.
Ali Bacher and Phil Laurie, the two opposing captains, are on the pitch for the toss, which Bacher wins, and South Africa bats first. Barry Richards settled down quite nicely after veteran Trevor Goddard's departure. Joined by his skipper, Bacher, the two batsmen keep the scoreboard moving.
I spent half an hour getting off the mark. I'll never forget that, because the only thing I didn't want to do was get a naught. And I'll never forget, I hit Garth McKenzie for a 4 square of the wicket, and I think it was like getting $1 million. You know, it was just such a relief to get off the mark. And I played reasonably well in the first innings. I was very tense. I got around about the 30 mark, and then I got 30 in the second innings. But the atmosphere, you know, I'd been brought into it, and Ali was very good that way. He made sure that if you were a youngster, he shared a room with you and groomed you into it, which was good. And I think the whole atmosphere in the Springbok side at that time was just bubbling with confidence, and it had to rub off on you. And that's one of the nice things about playing when you play for your country with fellows like Ali and Eddie Barlow. It was just oozing confidence.
Richards did well enough on debut to keep his place for the second test in Durban, a match that would become a high watermark for South African cricket.
The Australians come out the field at Kingsmead. Barry Richards is quick off the mark and in an aggressive mood, but he loses his opening partner Goddard and then Bacher, and is therefore robbed of the chance of becoming one of the select few to have scored a century before lunch.
Barry obviously at 90-odd before lunch. I mean, he was firing really fantastically.
I remember vividly what happened the first session of that test match in Durban in 1970. Barry Richards scored 94. And the ground, it was Barry's home ground, and so the ground was abuzz with the name Richards. A wicket fell in that last over. Graham Pollock came in at number 4. And there was 3 or 4 balls to face in that over. He whacked a couple of 4s, and then at the end of the over he sort of stood and leant on his bat. And I remember saying to Keith Stackpole, who was next to me in the slips, I said, "We've got a problem." And Stacky said, "What's the problem?" I said, "He's going to see how many runs Barry Richards gets, and then he's going to double it." I was wrong. Barry Richards got 140 and Graham only got 274.
In the afternoon session, the Australian attack was put to the sword. Richards and Graham Pollock added 103 in the first hour.
That hour after lunch on the first day was unbelievable. I mean, we talk about one-day cricket now and how people hit the ball. That was not hitting. That was stroke play, and it was the most brilliant cricket I've ever seen in my life. 2 greats of the world, the best, as I've said, trying to outdo each other in some way.
It was one of those sessions that happen every now and then that Barry had played so well, and I think when the Aussies came out after lunch, they weren't over positive as what was going to happen.
It was a partnership that I really enjoyed. It's probably the pinnacle of my Test career, was that moment. I'm not sure you know it at the time, but it was, in retrospect. I think 100 in your hometown, in front of your home people, where the town was just alive with Test cricket. You know, everybody wanted to talk about Test cricket, and particularly as it happened when Graham had played so well as well. I think that was just a magic afternoon, which, was probably the pinnacle.
Barry Richards is quick off the mark to give the Springboks a good start.
South Africa scored overwhelming victories in the third and fourth tests. Barry Richards was magnificent, his confidence growing with each innings. He made 500 runs in the series, adding another century in Port Elizabeth to his maiden 100. His place was now assured in a South African team remembered as one of the greatest of all time. Boasting players of the calibre of Peter and Graham Pollock, Barlow, Lindsay and Proctor, these Springboks were an irresistible force. They threatened to dominate world cricket in the 70s, and Richards himself was at the threshold of a long and fruitful Test career. The tragedy for him and for cricket was that he would never again play at this level in front of his home crowds. In 1971, the world's best cricket team was cast out of the game.
150 to D'Oliveira, his highest ever Test score.
I suppose it all dates back to the proposed England tour of 1968-69. Basil D'Oliveira was selected as a replacement for the MCC touring party for that trip, and the South African government objected to him because Basil was actually born in South Africa originally and was a Cape coloured. They objected to Basil's appearance in the touring party, and the MCC replied that they were not going to have the touring party selected by the South African government. So as a result of that, the tour was cancelled. And that period really was the start of isolation for South Africa until they returned to world cricket in 1992. But because of that, of course, it meant we missed out on seeing so many great players like Barry Richards, Mike Proctor, Graham Pollock, all in their prime.
Isolation in South Africa was a tragedy for everybody, not only for cricket but for all sporting people alike. Sport was such a powerful tool in South Africa that was always going to be effectively used in the boycott to bring about change, and I think that that's what happened, and the change fortunately came. But it's just a pity that it took so long, and so many players had careers that never could play themselves out on the international arena.
In 1970, with no immediate prospect of playing Test cricket, Barry Richards accepted an offer to play for South Australia in the domestic Sheffield Shield competition. In November, he walked out to open the batting against a formidable Western Australian attack.
Barry Richards, in the game against Western Australia where he scored 325 in the day. Now that's, a Sheffield Shield day at that time was 330 minutes. He faced Lilly, who was young and on the way up. Graham McKenzie, very, very fine Test match bowler, 250 wickets. Tony Locke, nearly 200 Test wickets and over 300 Sheffield Shield wickets for WA. Tony Mann, who played one or two Test matches as a leg spinner. So what we're talking about here is a pretty decent attack.
I was at the height of my powers. I was age 25, so you're mature enough, you've been playing first-class cricket long enough. The eye's still young, the body's still supple, so I think it just sort of all gelled into a day.
And I remember thinking during the afternoon, damn, I've never seen anyone score 300 runs in a day, and Barry's going to fall just short. It looked like he was going to get about 280. And then he suddenly, the Fremantle doctor was in, and Barry suddenly started hitting balls with the wind. At one end, he'd be hitting them through the offside. He'd go down the other end, and it didn't matter where they bowled him, he just hit him on the leg side because that was downwind. And he raced to 325. And, it's... And the thing that always stands out in my mind is the last ball of the day, Lilly was bowling to him with a second new ball. And he just went onto the back foot last ball of the day and went bang, and he hit it straight back over the bowler's head, sort of bounced once, twice, bang into the fence. And he just took his gloves off, put his bat under his arm, and he just walked off, almost as if, oh, well, there's, that's another day's work over, and he'd scored 325 in 330 minutes. I mean, he was a magnificent batsman.
In essence, it was only a 5.5 hour day. They only used to play 5.5 hours in those days. So, a lot of people assume that he got 100 in every session, but the first session is only 90 minutes. So it didn't happen that way as the middle session and the end session that were, when you really started to dominate. But I can remember it well, and Ian Chappell got 120 at the other end. So it was a big day for me.
Richards humiliated the best attacks on offer that summer, scoring 1,538 runs at an average of almost 110. With the repercussions of the cancelled tour of England still ringing in the air and the scheduled tour of Australia fast approaching, key South African players voiced their concerns over the worsening political climate at home.
The South African Cricket Association had then applied to the government to include 2 non-whites to tour Australia, and that had been turned down. And there were a number of us pretty annoyed about the whole system as it was anyway, never mind the cricket.
The players chose an invitational game in South Africa as a unique forum to make their protest. Richards and his friend Mike Proctor were at the forefront.
I ran up and bowled the first ball to Barry Richards, who didn't forget to get off the mark, by the way. And then we all walked off the field and we handed a press statement to the press. We stayed on the field for about 10 minutes. That statement read, "We, the cricketers of South Africa, feel it is time to give an expression of our views. And we fully support the South African Cricket Union's application to include 2 non-whites to tour Australia, if good enough. And furthermore, we believe that the criteria being merit totally in sport."
The government refused to budge, and the fate of South African cricket was sealed.
I saw no way back for South Africa in Test cricket. I thought that was a token gesture anyway, because those non-whites hadn't been playing with the whites, so how could you judge how good those guys were? And I remember just after that saying to one of the officials of the South African Cricket Union guys, during that match actually, I said to him, I hope you don't think we walked off the cricket field just to get back into Test cricket. And I think he got the gist of what I meant.
With his dreams of greatness in the Test arena now in ruins, Barry Richards returned to county cricket and a career with Hampshire.
County cricketers and county watchers at Southampton probably didn't realise how immensely lucky they were to have Barry Richards and Gordon Greenidge opening the batting. And that really was a privilege, because Greenidge was a magnificent player too. But when the going was really tough, Richards found it easier than the average mortal to play the ball that was moving around all over the place.
My second game, in fact, was against Yorkshire, and we went from Hove, with no motorways, as you remember, all the way up to Harrogate for our second game, and during the night the covers had blown up, and it was like a little S down the wicket, so it was a wet, dry scenario, and they had some pretty hard heads in the Yorkshire side, and I remember getting 70 out of 114, I think probably from a skill point of view, taking in the factor of the conditions. That was as good a knock as I played.
He played some absolutely great innings. I think it was Ray Illingworth who once said that these overseas players weren't so good, and who's this Barry Richards who's meant to be such a high-quality player? And I think, if my memory serves me right, they played on a wicket that really turned square. I think Hampshire were bowled out for 160 odd, and I think Barry, opening the batting, ended up with about 110 not out. So that answered Ray Illingworth's question.
Without the challenge of Test cricket, Barry Richards found it difficult at times to stay motivated on the cricket field.
I think there was a frustration because we didn't play Test cricket, and I think after a while I tended to go off the boil, and I probably said a few things about Hampshire at the time when I left that I shouldn't have, because it was a great, it was a great experience. I think at various points in county cricket I didn't have enough respect for it, and paid the penalty to a degree, but quite rightly so.
If a challenge was there, he was tremendous. If there was no challenge, then he would get to 50 or get to 100 and just toss it. Now, I can tell you, one day we were playing Natal in Durban. Barry got to about 40, and he turned around to me and he said, "Come on, let's have a little bit of fun here." And he played for the next half hour with the edge of the bat, and still hitting balls through the covers for 4, etc., etc. That's how great Barry was.
You couldn't really get a better technique. than he had. I think that so. I think as a player, I think you'd have to say that he was a real technician, and that was probably his biggest asset as a player individually.
He had everything, all the strokes, and all he needed was the will to try. And unfortunately, he hadn't got enough opposition. In later years when he played for Hampshire. It was too easy.
That problem it was from overplaying and county cricket. I think once you're too good and you're playing sides that are not too good, I mean, you need a rest here and there. That he did in county cricket. He wouldn't have done it in Test cricket. He would have gone on and on, that's for sure.
Lack of motivation aside, Richards scored heavily for Hampshire. But 1977 brought an unexpected opportunity that would catapult him back into cricket's elite.
I hadn't played that sort of competitive cricket for nigh on 8 years. And I don't care what anybody says, if you're away from that level of cricket for that length of time, it's very hard to recover and get yourself back. But what you do have is a lot of experience. And I think that's what held me in good stead. I mean, I played pretty well during World Series cricket, but when you get to 33, there's a realisation that perhaps you're not at the height of your powers, but you still got enough experience and enough skill to manufacture very good scores and to put your side into very good position.
Although his best years may have been behind him, Richards batted with distinction against some of the world's best bowlers.
Today, they don't regard that as first-class cricket. I just can't imagine why. It's not in any record books in terms of wisdom or anything like that, and you and I know how hard it was.
Richards saw out his career with the Natal provincial side, playing a few unofficial internationals against rebel touring teams. In 1983, he retired from first-class cricket to become an administrator in Australia. In 1991, after 21 years in exile, South Africa was readmitted to the Fellowship of Test-playing countries. Even without the stimulus of playing for his country against the very best in the world, Richards can look back on an array of remarkable performances. He made 28,358 first-class runs at an average of more than 54. He made 80 centuries, including 9 before lunch. In his short Test career, he averaged over 70, including 2 centuries. What might he have achieved if he'd played 40 Tests, or 140?
The sad part with Barry's career is that he only played 4 Test matches, and it's therefore very difficult to place him in his era of batsmen. I mean, I know that he was very good, and if he'd have played a lot of Tests, he probably would have ranked up there with the best. But when he only played 4, it's hard to rank him.
It's just a pity that he only played 4 Tests. I mean, I really would hate to think if his career had been 40, 50 Tests, what could have happened.
Barry Richards was a great player, and I would have loved to see him play Test cricket, because then we could have really judged him.
He plied his trade on the county circuit for many, many years, but he was better than that. So he got bored with the daily grind of first-class cricket, went and played 1 season of Sheffield Shield cricket in Australia and did brilliantly well. So I think from his point of view, I think it really affected him. I think the fact that he couldn't play international cricket was a real problem for him, as it should have been for a player of that ability and of that talent. And I don't think he really quite over that.
I think he would have broke every record going. Barry Richards, he was a great player. He's the best opening batsman I've ever seen, without a shadow of doubt. Tremendous player.
If you just had a look at his county games, his games that he played in Australia, his World 11 games, I mean, he was really one of the better players the world has seen.
Cricket was what he knew how to do and what he wanted to do, and he knew how to do it well. And I think that the whole thing that he couldn't play international cricket affected him as a person, and understandably so, because if something is taken away from you that's beyond your control, it is incredibly frustrating.
It is beyond question that he was a remarkable batsman. An accident of history denied him the opportunity to prove himself in the Test arena over an extended period of time, so we can never be fully certain about what he might have achieved. But Barry Richards, on those few occasions when he was fully tested in the best company, did enough to earn his place amongst ESPN's legends of cricket.